Right, so let me share my screen. So thank you for joining call. This sync call is for making sure that we are on the same page on this issue. Because we recently got a couple of conversations. So since we only have 30 minutes, I just put two agendas. One is definition of lead time for changes. And then the other one is a visualization for the lead time for changes. This is more like a UX front-end issue, but it's worth discussing it because it's also related to the backend structure. So yeah, let's get started from the first point, the definition of lead time for changes. So so I had already discussed the issue that if I understand correctly, it's from when merge request has been merged till the merge request has been deployed to production, right? Is it correct?
So that's our GitLab take on it. If you look at the Google definition of lead time for changes, it says the amount of time it takes for a commit to get into production. So now we get into, interpretation mode. Is it really from when the commit was created? Is it from when the merge request was created? Is it from when the merge request was merged? Another option that was raised on the customer success call that I had was don't calculate the time from when a merge request was created, but calculate the time from when the first commit of a merge request was created. So there's a lot of interpretation here. And we just need to decide on one. What I liked from what Nathan had suggested was to take it by two takes. And that was, let's present just the time from when the merge request was merged until it gets deployed to production as one take. But we would still need at some point to also show the time it takes from when a merge request was created until it was merged. And I think we have that data. So I think if we can show each one of them individually and then show a graph that combines the two, that would address all the definitions of this metric.
Yeah, so ideally we can provide three aspects of the data. So yeah, that sort of makes sense. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that what's the scope in this milestone.
Yeah, so I'm fine with starting with what we had suggested, just the time from the merge until the deployment to production. I'm okay with that. As long as we understand that we're going to need to present everything at some point, and at some point does not have to be in the MVC. And why am I saying this? Because when I think of the DORA4 dashboard, it's much larger than what we're doing now. Because when you look at the DORA4 metrics, they tell you basically how well your team is performing, but just showing a chart isn't enough. You need to drill down. You need to understand where your bottlenecks are. And maybe the bottleneck is the code review process, or maybe the bottleneck is deployment production, or maybe the code review, maybe a bottleneck is somewhere else. So I think at some point we're going to need to drill down to all this data, the merge time until it merges, the time it sticks in review, the time it takes from when a merge request is merged until it gets to production. Even go as granular as how long each job takes, I think, is going to be at the end of the day.
So one of my...
It's become very similar. Yeah, sorry. It's become also very similar to the VSM if we do all of this drill down. And of course, we need to collaborate as we're collaborating with the VSM team.
Yeah, so that's actually a good question. That VSM, we already have VSM, and we are kind of building a bit overlap the data, and then we got to make sure that we can aggregate both lines data. Maybe that's be better. But I'm not really familiar with the VSM code base, so yeah, things get wrong.
Yeah. So that's kind of why I like the suggestion that we suggested in this issue, which is just taking the time from merge until it reaches production, because that's more release oriented, you know, production environment stuff, and not necessarily everything that has to do with how long the pipeline took. And I think I also mentioned in the issue that we do have a mean time for merge that was delivered by someone else in the previous milestone. So I think maybe we can take all of this data that we already have and then present them together somehow. But as we want to focus on this specific milestone, I think we should go with time it takes us from merge until it reaches production. How do we feel about that?
I think it's a great approach. I also like it. It's very interesting metrics. For the future, what we said, I don't get why we need to measure since the merge created. It's more interesting to know since the first time someone, actually from the first commit, or from the moment that the branch created, not from the moment of a merge request created, because maybe there were many commits before a merge request created that nobody take them into account. Teams can create a merge request after a lot of progress that has been done. No?
Yeah. This is exactly what came up from the customer success call, and why they mentioned it's better to go to calculate this from the first commit, because people can be discussing a bunch of things on EMR before there's one line of code that's actually written. And so that's more accurate. But as we're talking about iteration at GitLab, the question is, what's the easiest way to start from? And we can always fine tune it later.
So like I want to throw one edge case is that sometimes rollback happens, and then rollback also contains the merge request associations. So like if we take the development time into account, the thing is gonna get much more difficult, I think. Yeah, I'd rather see it straightforward at this moment for these RE iterations.
I agree.
Also, my understanding of the 4 metrics, they all seem to be related to how you deploy and how you ship software, not necessarily how you develop it. That's kind of my understanding. So I think it makes sense to kind of exclude development time and just, you're kind of measuring the machinery to get stuff into production. So I think it's using the merge time as a start date would be consistent with that.
Yeah, I agree. Everything in DORA4 has to do with the production environment only. Yes, at some point we would want to make this more flexible and let our users choose whatever environment they want. But I think that has to go after the MVC. The MVC has to be these 4 metrics related to the production environment only.
Yeah,
sounds
makes
good.
sense. And then also, I want to fix one thing in this proposal. We should show the average time for merge. I just changed merge MR to production. We're currently saying the average time, but this should be, like Nathan pointed out, median. So it's slightly different, median. Median, right?
Yep.
Is it all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. The idea is to have a benchmark as long as we're consistent and we see what we're measuring, that's fine.
The other question I had too is what we consider, like for a particular day, do we consider, let's see, what am I trying to say? If we're, let's say we, on the graph, we're looking at a week, are all the data points, is that the MRs that were deployed to production that day, or is that when the MR was merged? And then, do you know what I'm saying? I think I said it better in my comment.
Yeah, I think we should count at when the deployment happened. So when the deployed at,
Okay. That's when it'll show up on the graph, is when it's deployed.
It's also
Yes.
consistent with the deployment frequency, which we counted as finish time. So I think that's good.
Cool. That's what I thought as well. I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah,
And
so-
Shinya, just for reference, the other in the deployment frequency graphs, all the date ranges we did were in UTC time zones. So we're not like translating it to the local time zones. So I'd assume we'd want to keep that consistent.
all right, got it.
I do have another question though. So we kind of talked about in the issue about how the strange data is going to happen because sometimes there are no deployments. And what I'd like to ask is, there are specific days that are not work days and that are going to be consistently at 0, probably the weekend. Is that something that we can exclude from the calculation, or are we going to show it anyway?
At the moment, we'll be showing it, certainly for like, I think iteration 1. But if that was I feel like we could probably hide those days if we had some way to configure it. It'd be a little complex because we'd have to build some kind of UI to select which days are the working days.
That would probably be an idea, but not for the release team. I wonder if we could use a release feature and then just, again, not for the first iteration for sure, but just thinking out loud, at least like remove the deploy freezes, dates, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Or at least, you know, show them on the graph, right? Say, even if we're thinking about timestamps, like it would be really easy to explain if you saw all of a sudden a drop on Saturday, right? So at least people could understand really easily what they're looking at. Or just like mark, this was a deploy freeze on the graph itself without removing it from the calculation, just showing it on the graph.
Yeah, actually that graph right there with the red bars, like that could be a way, one example of how we do it, like show kind of the ranges when it's frozen.
Someone I talked to, a customer, this was a really long time ago and I can't remember what the subject was, but they told me that there's some kind of statistics of the most productive days that you work at GitLab somewhere that you can see that. And that they thought it was really interesting that they saw their most productive day was Wednesday. So I wonder if we could probably show something like that after we have data, not in the first iteration, but like, these are the days that you deploy most frequently. These are the days that you're least frequently. And then probably you'll see Friday, Saturday, or something like that, Sunday.
Yeah, and also on top of that, we're going to show these levels, like light, high, medium, low.
Yes.
It's really cool.
I just opened the issue. Again, not exactly related to the subject we're talking, but really interesting. I opened an issue for the telemetry team so that they can start collecting this data so that we can present on, at least for SaaS, here's where you are placed versus everyone else on GitLab. So we're going to start collecting that data now that we have the first metric. And I thought it would be really neat also for self-managed users to have this way to compare to SaaS users as well. You know how we have the comp calculator as GitLab employees? So I was thinking you could insert your own data as self-managed and then have it calculate like where you are versus the SaaS and get your labels and badges. You're elite, amazing.
So yeah, actually that's a good point that I just want to dig into a bit more that actually I'm in this milestone, I'm building a feature that collecting daily metrics about the DORA. And then I was just wondering that if it makes sense to have the collection feature, that collecting metrics, the function should be placed in a core so that like we collect by default in all GitLab instances so that we can send a usage ping to, to our business metrics. and only like a premium users can see it in their dashboard in the GitLab instance, but like it doesn't, the visualization doesn't happen in the core because it's EEP tier. Just
Yeah.
honor.
Sure, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. And also after the MVC, like one of the first things that we want to do after the MVC is start opening it up for additional tiers. So even though we're doing everything ultimate now for the MVC, we do have a plan to open it up for premium and core users as well at one point.
Okay.
So it makes sense.
Orit, I have a question. When you do the comparison between different accounts, customers, it's based on the data that we have or based on the table that you showed, general table?
It's based on both. It's based on the data that we have. So theoretically, maybe no one is going to be in the league in GitLab, though I doubt it. But you would have a comparison view versus everyone else. So if we look at the issue.
Yeah, but when we compare to everyone, it's based of what we know about everyone from the data that we have, or from the knowledge that we took from Google, for example.
That's actually a really good question. I think, first of all, of course, that's based on the data that we're collecting that we have. The only thing that I am kind of thinking about today, we have really good definitions of what an elite team is. So for example, deploys multiple times per day. Lead time for changes is less than a day. Time to restore is less than an hour, and change failure rate is between 0 to 15% or something like that, right? What if the definitions change? I mean, I think we need to have some kind of enum at least that defines that, and so that if the DORA4 metrics definition change, we can change it easily. Because I think as DevOps matures, this is going to change. It's going to be like not only multiple deploys per day, it's going to be multiple deploys per hour, right? In like 2 years, it's not. This is not going to be elite for long. It's elite for today.
Yeah. Also, we will need to check with the marketing. It's fine to say to customer, you are a elite customer, you are a high performer, fine. But what we will do to the low? Oh, you are a bad customer. We think you're not performing well. So we need to think how we present it to low performing customers.
I think it actually ties very nicely to our transparency value. We're not telling them they're bad customers. We're telling them they could do better in terms of their SDLC lifecycle. And I think it's our job to also help them out to improve. So we can tell them different ideas that we had. So either point them to features that we have that can help them improve, or point them to really good examples of other projects of what they're doing, maybe in their YAML. Maybe we can find some statistics. And again, I'm talking really far along the way.
Yeah, sure, for sure.
But maybe we can say, okay, anyone who has over 30 jobs in their YAML, the pipeline is so very slow, and the deployment frequency, there's a correlation between low deployment frequency and the number of jobs in the pipeline. And so maybe you should think about splitting this up or things like that. But of course, we need data and analysis, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the graph visualization a bit. It's not in this milestone, but it will happen in the next milestone, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe we're going to show something like this. But the point is that it's a bit different from deployment frequency. Deployment frequency is that in the deployment frequency graph, the higher value is better. So like here, we are seeing something like 300, right? So this is a good score. But in lead time for changes, this is bad score. The high value means that it takes more days
It's a
to
long
get
time,
to
yeah.
be. So like we got to think about the, how we present the data for users should be different from deployment frequencies. So
I have an idea. What do we think about putting targets on the graph? So we show the different timestamps regular, just like the graph you showed a minute ago. And then we can put bars on the chart that says, this is elite, this is high, this is medium, this is low, like a target. Because we said lead time for changes for elite is less than 1 day. And between a day and 1 week is high, right? So we can color the graph or something like that so that people know where they're placed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, I want to point out that when deployment didn't happen, the lead time for change will be 0, like
Yes.
that. And then this is also not good. Should be considered as a good score. So this graph is very good that if it's 0, that means that deployment didn't happen. So this is,
Sure. Yeah.
not good score.
Yes. I wonder though, Nathan, this is more in your realm. Like, I want us to think iteration here. What's the easiest to start from and how we can build and improve it over time? Because this graph seems a little bit complex.
Yeah. I don't think this would be an iteration 1 thing for sure. The immediate question I have is Shini, if you want to scroll up a bit, those are kind of 2 options how we could present the data. And it's basically, do we plot days that have 0 deployments on the graph? And do we plot them as 0? If so, you get the top version. And then if you skip the days that don't have any deployments, you get the bottom version. So
I think the bottom version is really confusing, but that's just me. Itzik, what do you think? You're on mute.
Yes, I'm also, there is the kids here, and this is why I'm mute. So I'm trying to see what I see on the 2nd of the February, we had, what is mean like 6, for example, 6. What does it mean 6 numbers?
yeah, it would be the
What are
median
the-
time. So
the median.
it'd be like I guess time. So the 2, they're showing the same thing. It's just like the difference is, for example,
yeah, but I try to understand what I mean 6 hours.
6 hours, that's the question.
6 hours since the merge to the deploy. And then on the 9th, it took like 9 hours, right?
See, so that's where it's a little bit deceptive, is because on the 9th, there was 0 deployments. And so there's no lead time data really. So the top one shows that because it's 0, but the bottom one kind of makes it look like there was data there.
Yeah.
But there's actually no data in between like the 9th to the 16th. All that, okay. There's no data.
Yeah.
So I'm leaning towards the top one, but the problem that Shinya is pointing out is that makes it look good because lower is better on this graph. But in reality, it's actually bad because you had no deployments. So we're kind of making a metric that it makes it seem like not deploying is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think I feel more comfortable with the top one just because I can understand the graph easily. But we should state, maybe like next iteration, we color red as 0 because that's bad. Or again, we can do the bottom bar as green, and then between 1 day and a week, oh wow, in hours, this is going to be horrible. We color like yellow, and then we have orange or whatever. That's not going to fly with colorblind, but just plot on the graph where you would be if you were elite, blah blah blah, so you could understand that this is a graph that goes downwards instead of upwards?
Instead of one line, can't we have only the points and then this will solve the problem?
Yeah,
So-
I think it also makes sense to show points instead of lines
Instead of
like
one
that.
line. And I
Yeah, we
realize
could do that.
it's hard for me to understand. What do you mean that a time that day that were no deploy? So there was a merge, but no
No.
deploy? What does it
There
mean
was
that?
merge with the deploy. Let's say you have a deploy freeze. It's now Christmas. So maybe people are working, but we don't want anything on production. So there's not going to be any deployment.
So for my understanding, the lead time to change in that case will be very high. Because, for example, I had a merge on Sunday. On Monday, there was a freeze, and it's deployed on Tuesday. So
Yes.
for me, it's like 3 days.
Yeah, but
It took.
again, the graph, you would need to, at some point to add annotations and drill down to understand what goes on the graph. So you would know that this was a day of deploy freeze, or this is the weekend. Or even if there was a hot fix. And so all of a sudden you see an explosion of merges because, you know, there was some production incident.
I think I know what you're saying, that though, is I think what you're saying is during that deploy freeze, the graph should be really high, because it's, let's say we have a weak deploy freeze and I make an MR in the middle of that. Kind of logically, I should see everything start to spike until we start deploying again, and then it should go down. But I think the difference is between whether we show the data points as there were, let's say, 5 MRs created on this day, so we have 5 data points on that day, or do we show 5 data points because there was 5 MRs deployed that day? So it's, do we want to show when MRs deployed or when MRs are created? And that will affect how we see those like dry periods. I don't know if that makes sense.
Can we ask to start playing with it and just see how it looks and then make a conscious decision? Because I think that any way that we display, I think that if we display it like the median time here, the top one, which kind of looks good, but it's lying, as long as we note, please note that no deployments is not considered in the median or something like that. It means no deployment happened at this time. I think we're okay. And as we decided in the beginning of the conversation, that we're going to choose by the deployment time and not by the merge request creation. So we should be okay, I think.
Yeah, if we're solid on that, I'd say that's the only piece we need to decide, is when we kind of mark when the data point appears. And if we're fine with doing deployment time, then everything else is kind of more visual front end, and we can push it off till next milestone. And the API won't change depending on how we, like even these 2 graphs here that you see, those would both, the same underlying data would be returned from the API. So yeah, there's some flexibility there.
Well, great. I have to drop it. I think we're okay. I think we have a decision.
Yeah. So thank you everyone joining the call. See you the next time. Bye.
Thank you, Shinya.
See ya.
Shinya, bye. Thank you. Bye.